By the summer of 1849, the air in Wilcox County hung thick as syrup, and the flies moved slow, drunk on the heat. The roads were quiet then. Most travelers avoided the stretch between Pine Hollow and the Black Belt plantations after dusk. They said the land there was sick, that the very air had turned against the living. It was there, amid swaying fields of ruined cane, that the rumors began, a girl born of fever and lightning, whose body was melting from within. The year 1849 had turned Wilcox County into a slow-burning oven, the kind of heat that didn't just press on the skin but sank into the lungs, heavy and wet. It was the kind of heat that made the living sluggish and the dead restless. The dirt roads that cut through the cane fields shimmered under the sun, soft as clay, and even the horses refused to move fast. People who traveled those paths spoke of a silence that didn't belong to nature, a silence that seemed to listen. They said it began after the lightning storm, the one that split the old sugar house in two and burned the air for miles around. It was in the weeks that followed that whispers about the girl began to crawl through the county like a fever, first in the kitchens, then in the markets, until even the church pews weren't safe from the talk. The first time anyone outside the Mayfield plantation heard about her, it was from a farmhand who came stumbling into town before dawn, pale and trembling, claiming he'd seen the girl's shadow move after she'd gone still. No one paid him much mind at first. Summer heat drove plenty of men to madness, but when he described the smell, that sharp sweetness like burnt sugar mixed with decay, even the preacher stopped laughing. The story took on its own life after that. By the time it reached the ears of Dr. Elias Carter, a traveling physician from Montgomery, the girl had already become a ghost in the minds of the townsfolk, a creature half alive, half punished. Dr. Carter wasn't the sort to believe in curses or whispers. He had built his career on the back of rural superstition, curing what others called witchcraft with a clean scalpel and a steady hand. When he heard about the Mayfield girl, the one who melts, as she was called in the taverns, he felt the same spark of curiosity that had led him through cholera camps and fever towns. He packed his instruments, his ledger, and his pride, and set out toward the plantation that locals warned him not to approach after sundown. They said the trees along that road leaned too close to the path, that their roots drank from poisoned ground. He ignored them, as men of science often did. The deeper he went, the quieter the land became. The cicadas, once deafening in their chorus, fell silent. The air grew heavy, as though the sky itself were pressing downward. When he reached the edge of the Mayfield property, he found the gates half open, the hinges streaked with rust. A fine mist hung over the fields, thick and slow-moving, clinging to his boots as he walked. He saw the remnants of sugarcane rotting in the soil, their stalks warped and bent, their sweetness gone sour in the heat. Somewhere in the distance, something creaked, a slow, dragging sound, like wood shifting under its own weight. Inside the plantation house, everything smelled faintly of mold and iron. The wallpaper had peeled in long, curling strips, and the air was damp enough to bead on the doctor's skin. He met the father first, a tall, hollow man whose clothes hung off him like they belonged to someone larger. The man's eyes were rimmed red, his voice dry as dust when he spoke. He didn't greet the doctor right away. Instead, he simply stared, as if weighing whether the man before him was flesh or apparition. When he finally spoke, it was with a kind of resignation, not hope. "You'll see her," he said. "But you won't touch her. Not once." Dr. Carter followed him down a narrow hall lined with old portraits, their faces half faded by time and humidity. At the end of the corridor was a door shut tight with iron hooks. The father hesitated before unfastening them. "The others wouldn't stay," he said softly. "They said her skin burned through their gloves." The words were almost lost to the sound of the last latch giving way. The smell hit him first, a sweetness so dense it made his stomach twist. It wasn't rot, not exactly, but something worse, something that pretended to be pleasant. The room was dim, its windows boarded to block out the light. In the far corner lay the girl. She couldn't have been more than 16, her body small beneath the tangle of sheets. Her hair clung to her scalp in damp strands, and her skin, God help him, her skin glistened like wax under the lamplight, not slick with sweat but softened, as though it no longer belonged to her. Each shallow breath she took seemed to ripple beneath the surface, her flesh moving in ways it shouldn't. He stepped closer, the floorboards groaning under his weight, and the girl's eyes fluttered open. For a moment, they seemed perfectly normal, grey, clear, aware. Then, as the lamplight struck her face, something shifted. The pupils dilated too fast, the skin around her mouth trembled, and a thin droplet, clear and warm, rolled from the corner of her lips and slid down her neck, disappearing into the sheets. The doctor froze. He had seen gangrene, fever blisters, even the slow rot of leprosy, but never this. Her body wasn't decaying. It was *changing. He reached for his bag, his fingers shaking. The instruments clinked together softly, a nervous symphony in the stale air. "Do you feel pain, child?" he asked, though he wasn't sure she understood. Her lips moved, forming a word he couldn't hear. The air around her seemed to hum, faint but unmistakable, like the vibration of a tuning fork against bone. He felt it more than heard it, an ache deep in his chest. The father turned away, muttering a prayer that didn't sound like any the doctor recognized. Dr. Carter tried to steady himself. He told himself it was illness, some rare infection, perhaps, or a reaction to the storm that had struck their land. Yet as he leaned closer, the faint scent of sugar grew stronger, and the girl's eyes shifted again, focusing not on him but through him, as though she saw something standing just beyond his shoulder. The hum deepened. The lamp flickered. For a moment, he thought he saw movement beneath her skin, like light trapped in a jar, pulsing faintly against the surface. He stepped back, his breath catching. Outside, the storm began again, the sky splitting open with a low, rolling growl. The father crossed himself, his voice trembling. "You should leave before dark," he said. "It's worse when the lightning comes." But Dr. Carter couldn't move. He could only stare at the girl, at the way her body seemed to shimmer with something not quite human, not quite earthly, and he knew, even then, that this was no sickness he could cure. It was something else, something that had waited beneath the soil of Alabama far longer than any of them had lived. The Mayfield plantation sat deep in the heart of Wilcox County, surrounded by acres of ruined sugarcane that swayed in a wind no one ever felt. Once, the land had been the pride of the region, rows upon rows of tall, golden stalks glistening under the Alabama sun, sweet and strong, the smell of boiling syrup rising from the sugar house like a hymn. But by the summer of 1849, the fields were nothing but brittle husks, blackened from the storm that changed everything. Locals said the lightning that night had not come from the sky, but from the earth itself, bursting upward from the fields with a sound like cracking bone. They said it struck the old sugar house and left behind something that refused to die. That was the night Clara Mayfield's sickness began, the night the heavens touched the soil and something unnatural was born in the middle of that charred ruin. The Mayfield family had been prosperous once, though no one could quite remember what they'd done to earn such fortune. Old stories whispered that the land was bought cheap from a widow who had buried 3 sons there, and that her curse still slept beneath the roots. When the storm came, it tore through the fields like a living thing. The sugar house, a great timber building where cane was crushed and boiled into syrup, was the first to catch fire. Neighbors who watched from the distant road said they could see the flames turn blue, then green, then vanish entirely, leaving only smoke that glowed faintly from within. The next morning, when the workers approached what was left, the ground around the ruin was warm, as though something still burned under the soil. That same night, Clara woke screaming. Her father found her in bed, drenched in sweat, her hair clinging to her face, her lips trembling with fever. He said she kept repeating the same word over and over, light. When he pressed a damp cloth to her skin, she flinched as if burned. Her skin, once cool and smooth, was hot to the touch, pulsing like something alive beneath the surface. Her breath came in short, wet bursts, and a faint sweet scent filled the room, like molasses boiling too long over fire. The family's housekeeper swore she saw steam rise from the girl's arms, though no candle burned nearby. By morning, her fever had broken, but something in her eyes had changed. They were no longer grey but pale and glimmering, like the reflection of lightning on water. Her father sent word to the nearby town for a doctor, but when the first one arrived, he refused to touch her. He took one look at Clara lying there, her skin flushed and glistening, and backed away muttering prayers. The second doctor made it as far as the porch before turning pale, saying he could feel the heat radiating through the walls. The third, a man of science who prided himself on reason, stayed the night and returned to town the next morning white as a corpse. He told no one what he'd seen, only that the girl's body is not her own. After that, no one else came. The plantation was left to itself, isolated by both fear and superstition. Clara's condition worsened with every sunset. Her father tried to keep her cool, bringing basins of water from the well, but each time he touched her skin, the water would hiss and steam. Her night clothes began to cling to her as if soaked from within, but there was no sweat, only a faint residue that shimmered under the lamp like melted wax. She began to talk in her sleep, her voice rising and falling in a language her father didn't recognize. Sometimes, when the storms rolled through again, her voice would echo the thunder, not louder, but deeper, as though it came from the ground instead of her throat. The old sugar house, or what remained of it, still stood at the far edge of the property, a heap of blackened stone and twisted iron. For weeks after the lightning strike, a low hum could be heard coming from its ruins, like a swarm of bees hidden beneath the soil. Some nights, the air around it shimmered faintly, the way heat does above a forge. When Clara was strong enough to walk again, she began wandering the halls at night. The housekeeper followed her once and saw her standing at the window, staring toward the sugar house with her head tilted, lips moving as though answering a voice only she could hear. When the housekeeper called her name, Clara turned, and for the briefest moment, her face seemed to ripple in the lamplight, soft and uneven, as if her skin were made of something that couldn't hold its shape. The woman screamed and fled, refusing to stay another night in the house. By the end of the month, the Mayfields had dismissed all their servants. No one wanted to be near the girl. Her father sealed off the upper rooms, closing her away from the rest of the house. From the yard, workers claimed they could hear a faint dripping sound through the shutters at night, as though rain leaked from the ceiling, though the sky stayed dry for weeks. One man swore he saw a thin wisp of light through the boards, flickering in rhythm with the distant rumble of thunder. When he told Clara's father, the man struck him across the face and told him never to speak of it again. The locals began calling the plantation the melted place. They said the earth around it had soured, that crops wouldn't grow there anymore. Cattle refused to cross its boundary, and dogs howled when the wind carried its scent. A preacher who came to bless the land claimed he felt the ground tremble beneath his feet, as if something buried deep below had turned in its sleep. He left before sundown, refusing to return. Every night, Clara's father would sit by her door, listening to the strange rhythm of her breathing, half terrified, half devoted. He told himself she would recover, that the fever would pass, but deep down he knew she was no longer the girl he had raised. The light that once filled her laughter had changed, become something heavier, more ancient. When lightning flickered across the fields, it seemed to answer her, illuminating the ruins of the sugar house for a heartbeat before plunging everything back into darkness. The townsfolk stopped traveling near the plantation altogether. They said the girl had absorbed the lightning, that she carried it inside her now, that the night the sugar house burned was the night she stopped being human. When the third doctor came to the Mayfield plantation, he arrived without an invitation but with an air of certainty that made the townspeople whisper he would not last the night. His name was Dr. Hiram Lyle, a man known across Alabama for his peculiar patience with the unnatural. He was not a man of faith, nor a man easily stirred by superstition. His world was one of flesh and bone, of illness and remedy, and he believed every curse had a name buried somewhere in the anatomy. Yet as his carriage rolled through the narrow road to the Mayfield estate, he could not help but notice how the air thickened the closer he came. The cicadas had gone quiet, and the scent of something sweet, unmistakably like burned sugar, hung low over the fields, clinging to his coat and the horse's manet. He had treated yellow fever, cholera, and gangrene, but nothing had ever smelled like this, a perfume of decay disguised as sweetness. The plantation stood silent when he arrived, its shutters drawn against the daylight. The front steps were warped by moisture, and the once white columns had turned grey with mildew. He knocked twice before the door creaked open, not by a servant but by the master himself. Mr. Mayfield looked as if he had been carved from the same wood as the house, worn, sunken, and lifeless. His voice was hoarse when he spoke, a voice that sounded unused to speech. "You're the third," he said quietly. The first two didn't stay long. His hands trembled as he motioned for the doctor to come inside, but not from fear, at least not the ordinary kind. It was something older, deeper, as if he were afraid not of death but of recognition. The air inside the house was suffocating, thick with humidity and a faint metallic taste. Dr. Lyle could feel the weight of it pressing against his chest as he walked through the dim corridor. The wallpaper, once patterned with flowers, had bubbled and peeled in long strips. Every window was boarded, sealing away the light, and the faint sound of dripping water echoed from somewhere above. "Is she alive?" Dr. Lyle asked. Mr. Mayfield gave no answer, only turned toward the staircase and started climbing, his footsteps slow and uneven. At the top, the doctor could hear the faint hum of something mechanical, though there was no machinery in sight, just a soft vibration in the floorboards, as if the very wood were breathing. When he entered the room, the doctor's first impression was the heat. It rolled toward him in slow waves, not from any fire but from the girl herself. She lay in a bed that had been stripped of its linens, her thin body covered by nothing more than a white sheet that had turned translucent from moisture. Her chest rose and fell with a strange rhythm, not labored, but deliberate, like something mimicking the pattern of human breath. The skin on her arms shimmered faintly in the lamplight, not with sweat, but with a waxy sheen that caught the light and refused to let it go. Dr. Lyle approached slowly, aware of how the floor creaked beneath his weight. Clara Mayfield was not what he expected. She was not monstrous in form, nor grotesque in the way villagers' tales had painted her. She looked like a girl who had been caught in the middle of some transformation, halfway between the living and something that could not die. Her lips were dry and cracked, but her eyes, when they opened, were lucid and calm, almost curious. Dr. Lyle bent closer, trying to take her pulse, and noticed immediately that her skin radiated warmth unlike any fever he had known. He hesitated, then placed 2 fingers against her wrist. The pulse was slow, too slow, and yet steady, as though her heart beat not for the body but for something deeper inside it. Her veins, faint and silvery beneath her skin, pulsed with a faint light that came and went like the dying ember of a candle. He withdrew his hand quickly, the skin on his fingertips tingling. "Extraordinary," he murmured. He tried to speak to her, asking questions about her pain, her dreams, but she only watched him, her gaze steady, her lips parting slightly as if to speak. The sound that came out wasn't a word, but a low hum, soft, sustained, and strangely melodic. It seemed to vibrate through the air rather than pass through her throat. For a moment, Dr. Lyle felt it in his chest, like a tuning fork pressed against his heart. He looked around the room, half expecting to see the walls trembling. Her father flinched at the sound, muttering that it had grown stronger every night since the storm. Dr. Lyle opened his bag and began taking notes. He observed the consistency of her sweat, if it was sweat at all, and the temperature of the air surrounding her body. The thermometer fogged immediately, its mercury rising faster than he had ever seen. He leaned close again, studying the faint shimmer of her skin, and saw movement beneath the surface. It wasn't muscle or blood. It was something fluid, glowing faintly, moving upward and then sinking back down again, as though her body contained light that refused to stay still. The sight made his stomach tighten. He thought at first it was an illusion, the flicker of the lamp playing tricks on him, but when he shaded the light with his hand, the motion continued, steady and deliberate. Her breathing deepened, and he realized she was watching him not with fear, but with recognition. The hum grew louder, vibrating through the floorboards, rattling the glass vials in his bag. "What do you see when you sleep?" he asked her softly, but she did not answer. Instead, she lifted her hand, a slow, trembling motion, and reached toward him. The doctor froze, caught between duty and dread. Her fingertips stopped just short of his face, the air between them hot enough to sting. He saw her skin glisten, a faint droplet forming where her fingers bent, running down her palm like melted wax. It hit the floor with a sound too heavy for something so small, and when it touched the wood, it sizzled, leaving behind a dark mark that smoked faintly in the still air. Dr. Lyle stumbled backward, his breath catching in his throat. Mr. Mayfield rushed forward, pulling the sheet back over his daughter's hand. "Do not touch her," he warned, his voice breaking. "They tried before. It spreads." The doctor tried to speak, but his words came out broken, his mouth dry. He wanted to say it was impossible, that no human body could behave this way, that heat alone could not explain what he had seen. But the smell of sugar filled the air again, thick and sweet, and he felt his heart thudding painfully in his chest. The girl's eyes closed, and for a moment, her body went still, her lips curling into the faintest smile, as if she understood the terror she caused. The hum quieted, but its echo remained, trembling in the air long after she drifted into silence, as though something inside her had spoken in a language he would never understand. The preacher arrived 2 days after the doctor's visit, summoned not by Mr. Mayfield but by whispers that had reached the churchyard in town. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered and severe, with eyes that saw sin where others saw sorrow. Reverend Silas Green had buried more people than he could remember and was known for his sermons about fire, brimstone, and the wages of pride. When he heard about Clara Mayfield, the girl whose skin glowed and whose body gave off heat like an oven, he said the devil had laid his hand upon that house. "No sickness burns with sweetness," he told his congregation, and though his voice was calm, there was a tremor in it, as if he knew the name of what haunted that land. He left the church before dawn the next morning, carrying a Bible, a silver cross, and a vial of water blessed 3 times over. The townsfolk watched him go and did not expect him to return unchanged. By the time he reached the Mayfield plantation, the day was already heavy with heat, the kind that settled into the bones and made the air shimmer like glass. The Reverend found Mr. Mayfield on the porch, staring out at the empty fields. The older man didn't greet him, didn't rise, didn't even blink when the preacher spoke. He only whispered, "She's not my daughter anymore." The words hung in the air like a confession, and the Reverend crossed himself before asking to see the girl. Mr. Mayfield didn't answer right away. Instead, he gestured weakly toward the house, as though even naming the room would bring misfortune. "I can still hear her when I sleep," he muttered. "She calls to me, but it's not her voice anymore." The Reverend stepped inside. The air was thick with that same cloying sweetness, the smell that made the stomach twist and the tongue ache. It reminded him of the sugar vats his father had worked as a boy, boiling syrup under the summer sun, the smell of heat and sweetness so strong it could suffocate. He felt sweat trickle down his neck as he climbed the stairs, his hand tight around the cross at his chest. The closer he came to her door, the heavier his body felt, as if something unseen pressed against him, warning him to turn back. When he opened the door, the light from his lantern flickered violently, and he realized it wasn't just the air that moved, it was the walls themselves, trembling faintly as though they were breathing. Clara lay on her bed, pale and still, her hair damp with sweat that shone like oil. Her eyes were open but distant, fixed on something beyond the ceiling. The Reverend felt the air hum around her, a low vibration that made his teeth ache. Her skin had a faint luminescence, like light trapped beneath thin paper. He began to pray softly, reciting verses meant to cleanse and comfort, but the sound of his own voice seemed swallowed by the room. The words grew thick on his tongue. "The Lord is my shepherd," he whispered, but the hum deepened, vibrating through the floorboards, through his bones. Suddenly, Clara's gaze shifted toward him. Her lips parted, and a whisper slid out, soft and fragile. "It hurts," she said, though her voice was not her own. It echoed, layered, as if 2 or 3 voices spoke at once from somewhere deep inside her chest. The Reverend took a step back, clutching the cross so tightly that the edges dug into his palm. "You must let him cleanse you, child," he said. "Whatever clings to your soul can still be cast out." But she only smiled faintly, and her eyes flickered like candlelight. The Reverend felt a surge of heat push through the room. The boards under his boots warmed until they smoked faintly. The scent of sugar returned, thicker now, sharper, like something caramelizing on fire. He opened the vial of blessed water and splashed a few drops onto her forehead. The moment it touched her skin, the hiss that followed was loud and violent, like metal plunged into boiling oil. Clara gasped, her body arching, and for a split second, light shot through her veins in thin, glowing lines, tracing the map of her body beneath the skin. The Reverend staggered back, horrified. The water hadn't cooled her, it had ignited her. The faint glow dimmed after a moment, but her breathing was faster now, her chest rising and falling with unnatural rhythm. She turned her head toward him, her eyes blazing not with fury, but with pity. "It's not mine," she whispered. "It never was." The Reverend's heart pounded. "What do you mean, child?" he asked, his voice trembling. She didn't answer. Instead, her gaze shifted toward the window, toward the black fields beyond, as though listening for something. The hum returned, this time deeper, almost resonant, and the Reverend realized it was not coming from her at all, it was coming from beneath the floor. He dropped to one knee, pressing his ear to the boards, and heard it clearly, a slow, rhythmic pulse, like the heartbeat of something vast buried in the ground. The room grew hotter. He could see waves of air shimmering above her bed, distorting her outline. "It's in the blood," she murmured. "It remembers." The Reverend stumbled backward, choking on the heat. "Your father must leave this place," he said, his voice cracking. "You all must leave before it takes more from you." But Mr. Mayfield only stood in the doorway, pale and silent. "We can't," he said softly. "She won't let us." The Reverend turned to him, about to speak, but then he saw it, the faint movement of light beneath Mr. Mayfield's skin, crawling up his neck, glowing for a heartbeat before fading. His stomach turned cold. "Dear God," he whispered, but the words felt hollow. The father didn't seem to notice. "She said the light came from the earth," he murmured. "She said it burns where the lightning fell." The preacher backed toward the door, clutching his cross tighter, feeling his heartbeat race. The girl's hum followed him down the hall, soft but endless, a vibration that seemed to echo in the marrow of his bones. By the time he stepped outside, his clothes were soaked through, and the evening air felt like cold salvation. He turned once toward the house, where faint light leaked from the cracks in the shutters, pulsing like a heartbeat. In that moment, he understood that whatever lived inside that girl wasn't possession in the way Scripture described. It was something older, something the earth itself had birthed and buried long before men had names for such things, something that had chosen her as its vessel because her blood could remember what others had forgotten. The first doctor had left behind his bag. The second had left his voice somewhere inside the Mayfield house. The third had left nothing at all. By the time the townsfolk realized that none of the three had returned to their practices, the story had already shifted from rumor to legend. People said the house had eaten them, that it drew them in with the girl's soft voice and the promise of saving her, then devoured them whole. Others whispered that the doctors had seen something that turned them to ash, and that their shadows still moved on the walls at night. Whatever truth there was, it remained buried beneath layers of fear and superstition, just like everything else that had ever come to rest on that cursed land. It was late August when the first of the disappearances became public. The first doctor's horse had wandered back into town without its rider, the saddle slick with something that smelled faintly of sugar and iron. A group of men followed the tracks as far as the Mayfield gate, but no farther. They said the air beyond it shimmered like heat over desert sand, though the sky that day was cool and grey. The men who stood closest to the fence felt a warmth rising from the earth itself, the kind that seemed to breathe against their skin. One of them leaned too close and claimed later that he heard a faint whisper, his own name carried on the wind. None of them crossed the boundary. They left before dusk, and not one spoke of returning. Inside the house, Mr. Mayfield had stopped trying to reach for help. He sealed the doors, nailed shut the windows, and burned every letter that had ever mentioned the word doctor. But the smell of sugar never left. It seeped into the wood, into the curtains, into the very breath of the place. At night, the floorboards would creak though no one walked them. The servants who remained said they heard sounds behind the walls, a scraping, a dragging, like something moving slowly through the timber. When they pressed their ears to the boards, they swore they could hear voices. Not words exactly, but tones, the faint rhythm of men whispering through the walls, as if the house itself were trying to remember speech. The first doctor's bag was found weeks later in the parlor, sitting neatly on a chair that no one had used since Clara's mother died. The leather was cracked, the buckles blackened at the edges, and the instruments inside were warped and fused together as though they had been heated in a forge. The glass vials were melted smooth, their contents long evaporated. At the bottom of the bag was a torn page from a journal. The handwriting was shaky, frantic, but legible, asterisk her blood moves with light. It clings to the air. God help me, it breathes. Asterisk no one ever learned who found it or how it came to be discovered, but by morning, the page had been passed around town like a sacred relic, read in whispers before being hidden away. The second doctor's disappearance followed soon after. He had returned to town briefly, gaunt and trembling, before vanishing again that same night. Those who saw him swore that his hands were blistered, the skin darkened as though burned from within. When asked what had happened, he could only mutter, "It was inside her eyes," before collapsing into silence. He spent the rest of the evening sitting in the churchyard, staring at the horizon, until the sun went down. By dawn, he was gone. His hat was found lying near the edge of the swamp, and the reeds there were singed black, the water steaming faintly as if it had been touched by something hot. The third doctor, Dr. Lyle, had been the only one brave, or foolish, enough to return more than once. He had spent nearly an hour inside Clara's room the night of his final visit, his voice rising and falling in desperate argument with Mr. Mayfield. Neighbors who lived far down the road said they saw flashes of light from the windows, faint but rhythmic, like lightning trapped inside the house. Then, as suddenly as they began, the lights stopped. When the servants went to fetch Dr. Lyle the next morning, his carriage still stood in the yard, the horses wild-eyed and drenched in sweat. The man himself was gone. Only his spectacles remained, folded neatly on the table beside the girl's bed. After that, no one entered the room again. The smell grew worse, sweet and thick and unbearable, and the sound of dripping water echoed through the halls, though no pipes ran through that part of the house. The father stopped eating. He sat for hours in the dark, listening to the walls hum. When the Reverend returned to check on him, he found the man sitting at the foot of the stairs, his eyes sunken, his lips cracked and pale. He would not speak, only pointed toward the upper floor. The preacher climbed halfway up before stopping. The hum was louder now, pulsing, rhythmic, like a living heartbeat echoing through the beams. He turned back. Mr. Mayfield was still staring upward, mouthing a prayer that no longer had words. By autumn, the plantation had fallen silent. The townsfolk said the fog around it never lifted, not even at midday. Travelers who passed that way claimed to see faint shapes in the mist, men standing in the windows, faces indistinct, watching. The air smelled always of sugar, even when the wind blew from the north. Once, a group of boys dared each other to cross the gate. They made it halfway to the porch before the ground beneath them began to steam. They said it felt warm, pulsing faintly, and they fled before the house could finish waking. Years later, when the land was finally sold, the new owners tore down the sugar house ruins first. Beneath the blackened stones they found fragments of glass, bits of bone, and something else, thin strips of metal, curved and fused together, marked with symbols no one recognized. Some said they were remnants of surgical tools. Others swore they were part of something older, something that had been there long before the Mayfields arrived. When one of the workers cut his hand on a shard, the wound didn't bleed red but pale, sticky fluid that smelled faintly of syrup. He left the site that same day, saying the ground had pulsed under his boots. No one ever learned what became of the doctors, though people said if you listened closely near the sugar fields on a stormy night, you could still hear their voices, low and strained, whispering through the mist. The smell of sugar would rise again, faint but sharp, and for a moment, if the lightning struck just right, the ruins would glow faintly, as if lit from within, the same pale light that once ran beneath Clara Mayfield's skin. They said the doctors had not died at all. They had been taken, absorbed, drawn into whatever force had claimed the girl. And now, somewhere beneath that cursed Alabama soil, they waited, their hands blackened, their eyes open, their bodies turned to ash and sugar and silence.